From the City of Angels near the Pacific Ocean, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. This is Coast to Coast AM. Later tonight, who's behind the secret door? 4 special guests. I have to guess who they are. By the way, happy birthday to my late father, Gabriel. You would have been 100 years old today. Happy birthday, Dad. Here's what's happening. A major winter storm battered the northern plains and upper Midwest with high winds and heavy snow today, forcing hundreds of schools to close, grounding air travel and making road travel difficult, if not impossible, in some areas in the United States. More than 50 million Americans were under winter weather advisories as the storm moved across a wide part of the western and northern United States into the east. Up to 2 feet of snow and winds up to 60 miles an hour expected in some spots during the day and into Thursday. Former Russian president and deputy chair of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Medvedev, says that Russia will disappear if it loses the war in the Ukraine. He simply says if Russia stops the special military operation without achieving victory, Russia will disappear. His comments follow U.S. President Joe Biden's speech in Poland on Tuesday. Here's Howard Bloom with his analysis of this mess. What a situation, Howard, huh?
Well, Medvedev's statement is a restatement of a myth that Vladimir Putin has been trying to put forth. On Friday, it's going to be a year since the troops of Vladimir Putin invaded the Ukraine, and new developments are taking place even as we speak. The war in Ukraine is becoming a piece in a new great game. Today, Wednesday, February 22nd, China's top diplomat, Wang Yi, visited Vladimir Putin in Moscow. Meanwhile, it's just been announced that there will be a summit between Putin and China's paramount leader, Xi Jinping, this spring in Moscow. The visit of China's top diplomat is not occurring on a random date. It comes in the week of the first anniversary of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. In other words, Wang Yi's visit gives a very overt Chinese blessing to Russia's Ukraine war. Wang Yi's visit also acts as a countermove to President Joe Biden's surprise visit to Kyiv, which broadcasts the message that America is solidly behind the democratic government of the Ukraine. And the Chinese visit is a countermove to Biden's 2-year effort to pull together NATO. In other words, the great power game around Russia's Ukraine war is solidifying the democratic alliance and its enemy, the alliance of autocracies, the alliance that you and I have talked about as the axis of evil. Meanwhile, there's a second new development taking place right under our noses. Vladimir Putin has lucked out. The Ukraine war he thought would be over in a week has lasted a year. That should be bad news. But Putin has used this failure as an opportunity. The state of war has allowed Putin to reshape Russian society to his liking. Protesters and liberals have been forced to flee the country or go silent. Theaters and museums have been reshaped to blast a simple message. Russia and its allies are the good guys. Western nations are the bad guys. Russia stopped a world dominator when it defeated the Nazis in 1945, and Russia is being forced to save humanity once again. The fact that Russia actually had a military alliance with Adolf Hitler, and that this Nazi alliance gave Russia half of Poland, plus all of Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, has been conveniently disappeared. The leading shows on Russian TV have been used to trumpet the message that there is a battle between good and evil, and only Russia can banish the darkness and bring the light. But there's more to this creation of an artificial reality. Reports the New York Times school children collect empty cans to make candles for soldiers in the trenches, while learning in a new weekly class that the Russian military has always liberated humanity from aggressors who seek world domination. New exhibits put on by the state have titles like NATOism, a play on Nazism that seeks to cast the Western military alliance as posing a threat as existential as the Nazis of World War II. The New York Times quotes Konstantin Malofeev, an ultra-conservative business tycoon who bragged in a phone interview on Saturday that the longer this war lasts, the more Russian society is cleansing itself from the Western poison. Now China has signaled that it's on board for this wild ride, one in which it hopes to get across the message that China is the one major empire that has never tried to conquer a foreign country. Unless, of course, you count the conquest of Tibet in 1949 or the recent takeover of the 1.35 million square mile sea that belonged to 7 other nations, the South China Sea. Remember, part of the great game is making of new myths, the fabrication of false realities, and the idea that if Russia loses in the Ukraine, Russia will disappear like the wicked witch of the West or the East is fantasy.
I agree with you there, Howard. Keep it up and keep checking this thing for us. A cyber attack earlier this month forced produce giant Dole to temporarily shut down production plants in North America and halt food shipments to grocery stores, according to a company memo. The previously unreported hack, which a source familiar with the incident says was ransomware, led some grocery shoppers to complain on Facebook in recent days that store shelves were missing Dole-made salad kits, for example. A key measure of home purchase applications fell last week to the lowest level since 1995 as high mortgage rates, surging inflation, and steep home prices sapped consumer demand for the housing market. Registered investment advisor Mish Shedlock with us. Mish, that's not a good sign.
It's going to get worse, George.
Oh, boy.
It has to, and we'll go over why. But first, let's look at the numbers. This is the lowest since May 1995, 28 years, and these are not population-adjusted numbers. This is an index level that's not adjusted for population, so this is really abysmal. Now, we had a small bounce in applications in January. Took us back to the October of 2022 level. I mean, I was pretty depressed, but that bounce ended in the last few weeks when mortgage rates soared back up. They were 6.88% today. The peak for this cycle was 7.32. It dropped down to 6%. That's what caused that little bounce in January that's now been given up. But the Fed is committed, and the minutes show again today that they're planning on holding rates higher for longer. That means mortgage rates are likely to be higher for longer as well. Saw an interesting study today, George, from Pew Research, and there's a lot of young people moving back in with their parents, and you can guess the reason here. 67% of them said it was for finances. 40 of them listed finance as a major reason. Let's just step back and look at what the Fed has done and the Fed's role in all of this. In their QE program, they slashed interest rates all the way to zero. Despite rent soaring, despite inflation soaring, they held them there. People were able to go out and refinance their homes if they were lucky enough to have one then, George. And, they slashed $500, maybe more a month off their mortgage payments by refinancing. But now someone who's going out there trying to get a mortgage isn't looking at 3% rates. They're looking at rates close to 7%, and they're looking at home prices that have, more than doubled in the past few years, George. It's a killer scenario. I don't think the Fed can fix it. The Fed is partially responsible for this, and of course, Congress, with 3 rounds of fiscal stimulus, helped add to this inflation mess as well.
Not as bad as 2008?
No, not at all, George. Completely different scenario. We had liar loans, ninja loans, no income, no job loans, as they were called back then. So people aren't going to be walking away from their homes because they've soared in price. The thing is, though, it's going to prevent a lot of people from moving. It's going to decrease mobility because, who wants to trade in a 3% mortgage for a 7% mortgage, right? And so much of the economy depends on housing. When someone buys a home, they start a family. Typically, they buy appliances, furniture, carpeting, landscaping, everything else. All that stuff goes into that home. Homes are very cyclical, but they account for a big portion when the economy goes into recession because people pull back on housing, everything associated with housing. They pull back on family formation, kids, buying all the diapers, all of that stuff for kids. So Jerome Powell said, actually I said it first, I said this is going to be a long grind here because the Fed's not going to be able to step on the gas and lower interest rates for fear out of raising inflation again. So I think we're going to have a weak economy for years to come, George.
Just what we need. Thanks, Mish. Story we have on the carousel reel at coasttocoastam.com. A giant iron ball discovered on a beach in Japan has locals and officials baffled as to the mysterious object's origins. They don't know what it is. The sphere, almost 5 feet in diameter, was found by a runner on a beach in a coastal city and reported it to police. Local police and a bomb squad investigated that discovery, confirming through X-rays that the sphere appears to be hollow. Local officials said the object was not a threat and may be some type of buoy. It is bizarre. Go take a look at it, the highlight reel at coasttocoastam.com. Up next, Rod Pyle back with us after a couple of years as we talk about space and technology. Next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. George Norrie with you. Rod Pyle back with us has authored a number of science history books, including Destination Moon, Missions to the Moon, and In Their Own Words, The Space Race. He has also produced numerous documentaries for the History Channel and Discovery. He worked at the Griffith Observatory for 10 years and was an assistant professor at the University of Laverne. He has a B.A. degree from the Art Center College of Design and an M.A. from Stanford University. Rod Pyle back on Coast to Coast. Rod, welcome back.
Thanks. It's great to be back. How you been?
I'm great. How about you?
Well, I've been good. I'm now also the editor-in-chief of Ad Astra magazine for the National Space Society. So
good for you. You love space.
New day gig.
You love space, don't you?
I live space, yes.
What is out there right now that you would say is the most fascinating thing that we've been working on?
Oh, man. I mean, there's so much. The Webb Space Telescope has been just transformational. I mean, I think you and I both were probably sitting there while that thing was in its first 6 months thinking, okay, what's going to go wrong? What's going to go wrong? What's going to go wrong? 470 separate electrical and mechanical events had to happen for that thing to fully deploy properly. Let's remember, it had never been tested in zero-G. This thing was built on Earth, tested on Earth. We didn't know. And the discoveries just keep rolling in, everything from exoplanet observations to observations in our own solar system. So that's a big one. But, you know, what we're all waiting for, a couple of things. America returning to the moon.
Yep.
We may have some competition when we get there.
Why'd we stop, Rod?
Well, that's a geopolitical conversation because that's why we went. It was geopolitics, right? But fascinatingly, and you and I have talked about this in the past, you know, at the time, you and I were both alive for the space race. Remember, it was a race to beat the Russians to the moon.
Right. After they beat us with Sputnik, we had to go after them with the moon. And
it was a fairly crushing victory, although they did refocus on space stations and kind of beat us at that game for a couple of years. And now here we are looking at the moon again 50 years later. We stopped because there was no compelling geopolitical reason to go, in my opinion, and we just weren't spending the money. And it seems like the United States really needs a competitor, maybe not an enemy in this case, but a competitor, which, as Howard Bloom, my pal, would tell you, is China, very clearly China. And they're gunning for the same thing we are, the South Pole of the moon.
How did China, a third world nation during World War II, come on so strong in every area?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things. Now, it's not widely known. Their rocketry program and even their aspirations for a human spaceflight program started about the same time as ours in the 1950s. There was a professor at Caltech who was Chinese by nationality, and during the Red Scare here, he was evicted from the United States and went back to China. China took a lot of knowledge with him, so that was a big leg up. But, of course, as you know, when they make a decision for the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, they stick with it and they pour money and resources into it. And, of course, the workforce is much less expensive than it is here, and there's no such thing as a union. We, on the other hand, have these political divisions and shifts every 4 to 8 years. one thing that amazed me was watching the transition from the Trump administration to the Biden administration. There are obviously a lot of changes, but on spaceflight and defense, it stayed remarkably linear. And we're doing the things that we were starting out of the Trump administration, and that just saves so much money and energy and time.
What do you think of the Artemis 1 mission? And tell us what it is.
So Artemis 1 was the first attempt to utilize the new Space Launch System, NASA's new mega rocket, and the Orion capsule, built by Lockheed Martin, to go to the moon. We did not send astronauts on this one. It was uncrewed, and it flew late last year. Magnificent test. As you know, we had waited months and months for this thing to finally launch. But once it did, you couldn't have asked for a better mission. I mean, it was just spectacular. And it spent a number of weeks heading out towards the moon, looping it and coming back. And a couple of the big moments there was a lot of stuff that they were looking for, of course. They wanted to test the rocket to make sure it would launch safely. It's the most powerful rocket ever built at this time, much more powerful than the Saturn V. But crucially, we wanted to test the reentry, because this is the first time in half a century that we've had a spacecraft of this size come back from the moon and re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. Instead of the leisurely 17,000 miles an hour that you're coming back from Earth orbit, it's 25,000 miles per hour and heating up to about 5,000 degrees. And, we've changed a lot of things, including how you make a heat shield. So they really wanted to make sure that was going to work.
It better work.
Everything
That's right.
just went swimmingly. There are a couple of electrical gremlins, but overall it's good. So it looks like we'll be doing Artemis 2, which is a crewed lunar flyby, hopefully next year.
What's really the big difference between Artemis and the Saturn V rocket that we used to go to the moon?
Well, the Saturn V was a big, for the time, it was incredibly advanced, but by today's standards, it'd be kind of a big, dumb rocket. The first crew was the first stage, was fairly heavily built and was powered by kerosene, liquid oxygen, which are not the highest of energy fuels. And then the second stage, the third stage, had liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen rockets like the shuttle was. SLS used, in an attempt to save money, although it didn't, used legacy shuttle parts. So when that launches, that big main stage uses 4 shuttle engines, which are very powerful and very efficient, using liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen, and then the 2 massive solid rockets on either side. So it's a really different approach. What's interesting is it's more powerful than the Saturn V, but because it doesn't have a very powerful upper stage in this first iteration, it actually can't deliver as much stuff to the moon as the Saturn V could. So we've got some work to do to improve that upper stage to be more powerful.
Now, we get to the moon in, a couple days, Rod?
Yeah, depending on the trajectory you take, it'll take a little longer with this current program. And then once you're there, and we still have this conversation to be had about what you're going to use to land, and do you stop at the Lunar Gateway, which is being built in parallel to all this. So we're still building a space station, small one, that will be orbiting the moon, that can be inhabited and used as a way station to stop on the way there. So there's a lot of stuff in flux, but the big critical thing is we don't have a lunar module this time. We have a deal with SpaceX to use their Starship, a modified version of their Starship, to land on the moon. So because Congress requires us to use SLS and Orion to go to the moon, 4 astronauts will fly up there in the Orion capsule, then 3 of them will transfer over to Lunar Starship and land that on the moon, which is like landing a semi butt first, looking over your shoulder.
Jeez.
So, but, it's got a lot of cargo capacity. It looks like it's going to work really well, and eventually it'll become incredibly inexpensive to fly stuff to the moon. And then you can start really building things and develop infrastructure there, which is the big goal.
So when do you think we'd have astronauts back on the moon?
Oh, George, if I only knew that. I could be such a rich man. We're aiming for 2025. I'm thinking 2027, 2028.
Not that long. It goes by fast.
And again, the question is, we're aiming for the lunar South Pole. We want to go there because there's water there. Where there's water, it's ice, but we can melt it. We can use it to make rocket fuel, and then the solar system really is your backyard. Chinese are smart. They want the same thing. They've been getting very aggressive with their robotic probes in terms of their successes. So there is this question of who gets there first, and are they the ones that decide how that program is going to be run? Do you own that territory. Outer Space Treaty of the 60s says no. But as we see in the South China Sea, China does things a little differently than we do.
And when we come back, we're going to talk about China and the race for space, NASA's big message. Rod Pyle's website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. George Norrie back with Rod Pyle as we talk about space. His books are, by the way, on his website, so make sure you go to the coasttocoastam.com website and get the link directly there. What was your latest book, Rod? Was it Space 2.0, or do you have anyone out?
No, I'm working on a couple more, but Space 2.0 was the last one, and it actually has been adopted by the Air Force and Space Force, among other places, as a textbook, which surprised me pleasantly, I must say.
Do you ever see a country trying to stake claim to the moon or portions of it?
That's a really fascinating question, and we're right on the cusp of seeing that. So we've got NASA, which is leading the free world. We've drafted the Artemis Accords. We've got 23 countries and one territory that have signed, so they've picked up a lot of support around the world. China and Russia didn't see it that way. Now, China were sort of prescribed from doing business with them by ITAR and other legal regimens. And Russia, we're in that comfortable spot with Russia where we're still doing the space station together, but we're practically each other's throats on the ground. So the Chinese and the Russians have started a partnership to build their own station on the moon, their own research base. Not as many people signing on for that. So, there's going to be a scramble. It's a little bit like the gold rush again because, as I said, there's water, ice, glass, metal, oxygen in the soil, maybe even helium-3 if we ever figure out how to use that for fusion. So what we kind of would like to see, some of us anyway, is some kind of agreement sort of modeled on what we've done in the Antarctic, Everybody can share the territory, but nobody claims it. Another analogy would be, if we're looking at the ocean, let me keep the fish I pull up. I don't want to own the water, but we don't know what's going to happen.
Will there ever be a battle on the moon? A war?
America's in one way or another prepared for that since the 1950s. Wernher von Braun was commissioned by the Army to do a study called Project Horizon, which is going to put between 12 and 20 soldiers on the moon in a base probably just miles away from one that the Reds would build, and we had lunar claymore mines and nuclear bazookas that we were going to carry up there. Now, obviously, we never did it. We did Apollo instead. But we as recently as the second season of that show on Apple TV, For All Mankind, we've seen what that might look like. It's hard to imagine. The thing is, when you're in a situation like that, I mean, it makes the Antarctic look like a stroll in the park. Everything out there wants to kill you. Anything can. So you've got these temperature swings anywhere from 200 plus degrees Fahrenheit above zero to 200 plus below. A hard vacuum, radiation. There's all kinds of ways to die. So I'd like to think that humans on the moon would pull together and say, look, let's not do this. It's just hard enough being here. Let's try and learn to work together and share. But as you know as well as I, that doesn't seem to be the biggest part of our basic nature.
Why did the Soviet Union, now just Russia, just basically stop doing everything other than the space station?
Yeah. I think money and infrastructure. Their infrastructure was arguably better during the Soviet Union days. They are not well set for money, especially under current circumstances. Their budget is only about a tenth of the U.S.'s for space flight, and their hardware is old. The Soyuz capsules that they're still using to deliver their cosmonauts to the space station.
They leak.
Yes, they do. They keep blaming it on meteoroids, but yeah, that one's getting a little harder to believe. And those things were first designed in like 1963.
Oh, geez.
Now that gives you a chance to really refine a design, but it's old and it's dated. They've been working on updates, but they just don't have the money, and they've got a terrible amount of expertise drain.
It's bizarre too, Rod. We got to the moon with 60-year-old technology.
Yeah.
I mean, you would think with what we have today, we could get there like that.
Well, and, one part of that is the way we do business. So for decades, both NASA and the military did cost-plus contracting with the major aerospace contractors. So here's the amount of money we're going to pay you to build the rocket or the capsule, and then we'll pay you on top of that for your trouble. And that gets very expensive, and that's how a $4 billion capsule becomes an $8 or $10 billion capsule, and so forth. So now NASA's moving on to fixed price, which is what they're doing with SpaceX and Blue Origin and Maxar and some of these other companies that are building lunar landers and transport rockets and space stations to replace the ISS when the time comes. So it's like, here's the amount, and you better figure out how to do it for that. And if you need more, you got to have a really good reason. And by the way, Congress is going to be watching everything you do. Well, that's worked out really well. And even by NASA's own estimations, for instance, on the SpaceX side, its cost using SpaceX to get astronauts back and forth to our space station, in the International Space Station, cost, depending on how you price the numbers out, between half and a tenth of what it cost to do it the old way.
It is something going on with NASA. They seem to have lost a luster. I remember in my school days, every kid wanted to be an astronaut. Everybody knew about NASA. We knew the mission. Now it seems like it's non-existent.
I could see where you'd say that. I mean, I'm a little biased because I work at the NASA Field Center out here in L.A., Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
Kids don't talk about NASA.
Well, they're starting to. I mean, NASA, interestingly, if you look at polls, they are favored by the public about the same as they were in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It's about 50-50, depending on what question you ask. If you say, is NASA cool? Is NASA awesome? Is NASA the fifth best brand on the planet? And they go, yeah. And when you say, should we go back to the moon, about 15% say, yeah. The rest don't. But I think we're going to see a renaissance. One of the things I wrote about in Space 2.0 is this new arrangement of NASA using private business to do the heavy lifting and the boring stuff, and to let NASA go out and forge new territories and do research and support the really exciting things, because that's what they're best at. So I think if they're freed from doing basic transportation and can really use their vision to look forward to things like building infrastructure and getting a commercial market going in low Earth orbit and cislunar space out by the moon, then you've really got something, and that's where the magic will be.
Rod, what do you think of those Tic Tac videos that were taken off the Navy aircraft carriers that we couldn't just find out what these things are?
Yeah, I scratch my head. I mean, there's, to look at those things, your first response has got to be, well, yeah, those are not of this Earth. But I've seen some very good writing, and, some of it's based on military leaks, and some of it's just based on conjecture by academics and so forth, that there's, as you know, there's a school of thought that says these are foreign actors on the Earth that are using sophisticated electronics, drones probably, to spoof a battle fleet. So, for instance, a carrier task force. So this thing rises out of the water or drops down from higher up in the atmosphere, hits the carrier group or the aircraft that are flying near there with this bizarre EM signal, and then sits back and collects data on how we react to a threat, both in terms of radar sweeps and how we dispatch jets. That's very valuable intel, and, there's reason to think that might be what that Chinese balloon was doing, was monitoring electromagnetic emissions, because that's easier to do from that altitude in space.
Right.
So,
that's possible.
That makes sense to me, but you got to keep an open mind. It could be anything.
If it is that, then there's a division within government, something that is very secret and quiet, doing some very strange things.
Well, or just not letting us know for their perceptions of national security that, we're already sort of fighting this silent.
But not even letting our pilots know. Yeah,
exactly. And it is good to see this info coming out, and I laud NASA for this new study that they're doing. As you probably know, they've gathered. Now, they don't have much money, and they've only got 9 months to do it. I think there's about 5 months left. But they gathered academics, professors of astrophysics, physics, and engineering, people from the FAA, former NASA officials, other NASA officials, oceanographers, biologists, journalists, and really looking at the unclassified UAP, UFO material and saying not so much what is it, but how can we study this better and come up with better results and be transparent about it to the public? And I think that's really important.
What are your thoughts, Rod, on extraterrestrial life out there? I'm not going to ask you yet about here, but out there.
I think it's an inevitability. I mean, you've seen the numbers. You know how the Fermi paradox and
absolutely
work better than I do. You know, it's a seeming impossibility. The question in my mind is how far and how soon, and what are we going to find? I mean, I fully expect before I shuffle off this mortal coil in a decade or three, for us to have found something either on Mars, currently existing or past, probably microbial, and or in the oceans of the icy moons with those warm oceans below out by Saturn and Jupiter. Beyond that, your guess is probably better than mine because you talk about it every night.
There's too many eyewitness testimonies of strange visitations and things. I mean, even if 99% of them were making it up, there's that 1% telling the truth. And it's bizarre.
It really is. And one of the things that I always come back to is wherever they're coming from, if they're coming here, it's a long trip. So even if you got warp speed, unless you're teleporting or doing some kind of dimensional transition or something, it's a long trip. Are we that interesting that they would really want to come here and live amongst us and learn and share? Maybe we are. Or maybe life is just that rare and precious that it would make sense. But I tell you, getting back to this balloon thing, there have been people postulating that might have been a UFO. If these guys are smart enough to travel 40 or 50 light years to come visit us, and then they get taken out by an air-breathing jet with a skyrocket, I'm going to be really disappointed.
Yeah, me too. I think they have learned how to bend space and time. So they get from point A to point B instantly somehow.
Yeah, and it almost makes more sense for me to see one of these creatures coming out of my closet than landing in a field behind my house, right?
It's fantastic stuff, though, Rod, isn't it?
Absolutely.
What keeps driving you?
I love what I do. I mean, I haven't, since I've been working on the Ad Astra magazine, and I've now got a new podcast called This Week in Space I do with the executive editor over at space.com. I just love doing it every day, and there's so much stuff happening. As you mentioned earlier, there was this lull with NASA and efforts. We were stuck in low Earth orbit. We're really moving along now. Private industry is going great guns, and it's just an exciting as heck time to be alive.
We're going to take calls next hour with Rod Pyle, so jump on board and ask questions about things in space that we've been talking about. And his website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. And your books are all still available, aren't they, Rod?
Most of them, yeah. If you can't get them new, you can get them used for a couple of bucks, and there's no better deal than that.
What about water on the moon? Is it there?
Yeah, it's in the form of ice, what we've seen so far, but there's a lot of it, mostly in the poles, but also in regions heading up towards the equator in these areas called permanently shadowed regions. And it's there for the taking. And, because you don't have to launch it off of Earth, it is such an incredible bonanza because you can do so much with it up there, among other things, as I mentioned, making rocket fuel. So it just makes so much sense financially to go out there, get it, process it, and use it to move on to Mars and beyond. That's the goal.
How did it get to the moon?
We think comets, probably.
Just delivered it and blasted it in there?
Yeah, because the early solar system was a really crummy place to be. There were rocks and comets and big chunks of ice flying all over the place.
Oh, my God. Everything was getting hit all the time.
Yeah, there was this period called bombardment, late and early bombardment. And that's why the far side of the moon, for instance, looks as bad as it does because of constantly being smacked by things. It's just a mass of craters, overlapping craters, overlapping craters. So a lot of those were from asteroids. A lot of them were from comets. And we think that the comets were carried a lot of that primordial water, and that's what we're going to find there.
I think a lot of comets delivered water to good old planet Earth, too. What do you think of that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the difference here was, of course, because it was volcanically active and hot at the core, everything just keeps getting chewed up and spit out and chewed up and spit out over the eons, and that's why we've seen such a different environment here.
Do you think the moon has a hot core, or is it just dead?
I don't know. There are two schools of thought. The prevailing one seems to be that it's probably cold, and not much going on there. And, of course, during Apollo, one of the things they were trying to figure out is how much active volcanism went on, if any, for how long. But that's why we want to get back there. We only explored, during Apollo, with those 6 landings, we only explored an area about the size of a small to medium-sized town. So there's a lot of territory left to cover. It's not a been there, done that thing.
And we didn't spend that much time when we landed. When we took the missions to the moon, how long did we stay, Max? A day on the surface?
2 to 3 days, yeah. And with just, maybe 16 to 18, 20 total hours of EVA.
Right.
But you got to remember, and you were around, so was I. That technology we were using was just a decade and a half or so out of World War II.
That's true.
Really primitive. And so, for instance, the whole time the lunar module was on the moon, this frail little spacecraft that was purpose-built and just barely enough to do the job, it was evaporating water out of its water tanks to keep the electronics cool. It did it by evaporation.
And they weren't sure if that thing was going to launch off or not. Rod, stay with us. We're going to come back and take calls. And welcome back to Coast. We're going to take your calls in just a moment with Rod Pyle as we talk about all things space right here on Coast to Coast. Welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you, Rod Pyle with us. We're going to take your calls this hour as we talk about all things space. I knew Apollo astronaut Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14. What a wonderful guy he was, Rod.
He really was, and what an expansive thinker. I mean, at a time when the kind of stuff he was interested in and willing to try was really risky. I mean, that could get you called a nutcase. And he just, he believed, and he wanted to try ESP experiments. But he wanted to learn more about the universe and kept a really open mind, and as you know very well, formed the Noetics Institute and just did some really fine work.
I miss him.
Yeah, I mean, I miss all those guys. They were all fascinating and wonderful in their own ways, and there are just so few of them left. And, you go to a convention or a show where they used to be able to get 6 or 7 or 8 of these jets, and now there might be 2 or 3. So,
of the original Mercury 7 astronauts, are there any still alive?
Don't believe so.
They're all gone.
They're all gone, yeah. And Apollo's getting dangerously close as well.
Yep, they sure are. They sure are. It's funny. We knew the names of the astronauts. Nobody knows anybody anymore.
Well, there's a lot of them now.
Yeah.
The classes get bigger and bigger. There's going to be a lot more flying. There's certainly kids are going to know the ones that go up in 26, 27, or 28, though, because we're going to have a person of color and the first woman and so forth, and I think those names are going to become prominent. And, that's one of those, you talk about benefits of the space program, which is always a tough conversation. NASA needs to do better at telling their story. They've been trying for over half a century, and it's a struggle. And it's not, it's not their first duty. That's something that people like me are supposed to help do, but it's so inspirational. And you look at Elon Musk and you look at Jeff Bezos and whatever you think of those guys, they were inspired by the Apollo program. Lots of people were inspired by that. And we need something new to do that. And I just would like to relate an incident. I was interviewing Gene Kranz years ago for an Apollo documentary I was doing for the History Channel about 2005. And at the end of the interview, I said, Mr. Kranz, is there anything else you'd like to say? And, normally after you talk to these guys for an hour or so, they go, that's about it. And he said, yes. And he looked at me with those steely missile man eyes and said, what America will dare, America can do. And it just gave me chills. And he's right. We just have to put our minds to it.
Absolutely. Let's go to the phones. Brian in Indianapolis, welcome to the program. Hi, Brian.
Hey, George. Good morning. How are you?
Great, Brian. Hope you are, too.
Oh, I'm doing awesome. Hey, Rod. Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for calling in.
Awesome. Hey, listen, George. You got to have Tommy show you the picture I sent him of these binocular telescopes I got.
Okay.
I got a BT 100 Orion binocular telescope that I can use during the day or night, and it is excellent for looking at the moon, especially during the day.
What did it cost you?
Oh, it wasn't cheap. I'll tell you that.
They're really nice, though.
Oh, they are. They're excellent. I mean, and it's well worth the money. But I've been looking at your books. I think I'm going to buy a couple of your books. I've been looking at your website. It took me a couple hours to get this question together, and when I ask it, when I say this, I'm a 61-year-old redneck, but I'm going to sound like Dr. Travis Taylor, a scientist.
Okay.
Okay, now, let me start this right. Is the universe infinite? Okay. Now, if it is infinite, how is it expanding? And if it isn't infinite, is there an edge to the universe? And I'll just take my answer off the air because I got to listen to this.
Okay.
Good luck with that one, Rod.
Yeah, George, you didn't tell me I was going to be taking my PhD exam today.
Exactly.
So this is why I became a journalist, so I could interview really smart people and not have to know all this stuff myself. And I don't know that answer. I mean, I think I know as much as most of us do, which is, space-time is curved, and you see illustrations where they're trying to explain how all this works. But honest to God, I still don't get it. And I've read Stephen Hawking, and I've read the astronomy texts I had when I was studying at UCLA, which, of course, is a long time ago now, so a lot of that's dated. But it's just not something I really have enough expertise in to comment on, I'm afraid.
It is just truly remarkable. If it is expanding, what is it expanding into? What's on the other side?
Well, and that's where our understanding is so limited. And, within this area that we're talking about that's expanding, we still haven't figured out about dark matter and so forth. And this is this huge percentage of all the mass in the universe. What is it? Where is it? Why is it so hard to see and understand?
Mm-hmm.
And it's mind-bending to read this stuff.
And it has weight to it, doesn't it?
Apparently.
It's solid, yeah.
Yeah.
Strange times.
So, well, and that may be one of those things, we talk a lot, and you talk on your show about some of the weird phenomenon that is seen off Earth. And, maybe when we understand that better, some of this stuff will make more sense.
Next up, we've got Shad in Bismarck, North Dakota. Welcome to the program. Hi, Shad. Go ahead.
Hi, George, and thank you for taking my call. And
Thank you.
I appreciate your show every night. I enjoy listening to you and to Rod as well.
Thank you.
I just turned 50 this year, and I read a book about 20 years ago that I cannot remember the name of. I wish I could, but I'm just curious about your thoughts, Rod, about you guys have touched on the dark side of the moon. In this particular book, it talked about there's the reason why we have not been back to the moon is because we basically got told not to come back. I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
I heard that rumor as well, Rod, that we were basically told by ETs, don't come back.
Yeah, and, this is one of those things that I can't prove or disprove. I can have an opinion, but I will say, let me just take it a step way beyond. When I talk to groups where there might be some folks that think, I don't think we really landed on the moon and so forth. And if you spend a couple of decades, close to 30 years for me, I guess, going through this stuff, going to the archives, looking at the machines, the Saturn V's that didn't fly, and the lunar modules, talking to the moonwalkers and the other astronauts, talking to the guys in Mission Control, if it's some kind of conspiracy, it is way more efficient than anything I've seen in any branch of government in my life. And as you know, people aren't very good at keeping secrets over decades, and especially, you talk to some of these guys, and I'm thinking now about the astronauts and the moonwalker, the Apollo class. As they get older, most of them in their 80s, and they're all in at least their 80s or 90s now, and they get very reflective and very philosophical, and they start looking back on life, and they talk differently, and they feel differently, and they think differently. And if there was some big secret, I think we'd know it by now. I also think, there were other nations. There was the Soviet Union was trying to get to the moon at the same time we were, and they had looped it with uncrewed spacecraft, and we had both, of course, sent out lots of robotic probes. So wouldn't they be told the same thing? And I don't know the answer to that.
Buzz Aldrin, of course, still with us, second man to walk on the moon, and he looks great for 93.
He is, we're friends. I talk to him a couple of times a year, and I haven't seen him since before the pandemic, but that was not that many years ago. He still walks ramrod straight, much better posture than I've got, flat stomach, alert with it. He's got a new, younger wife that he just married, as you know. And he's just an amazing guy. I think the thing that really strikes me about him when we have conversations is, I mean, he's brilliant, obviously, but you get this feeling that there's like three minds in there all competing for the same mouth because he's got so much to say, and he's always thinking about advancing the human race, moving things forward, getting out there, and that's just an incredible thing.
Just don't tell him to swear on a Bible if you went to the moon.
Well, be ready to duck if you do.
Tom in La Jolla, California is with us now. Hey, Thomas, go ahead.
Hi, George. Thank you for accepting my call. Rod, It's always great to hear your interviews. And I'm going to ask a question about a concept, an idea that was very popular about, 45 years ago. And that was the idea of having a power habitat in geosynchronous orbit around the Earth. And what it would do is it would collect sunlight, obviously outside of the Earth atmosphere, and then convert that, beam it down by microwaves down to the surface of the Earth. And the idea behind this was that it was supposed to free the Earth from fossil fuels. I first heard the idea in a lecture from coast-to-coast guest, now deceased, Jerry Pournelle, about 1980. And he spoke extensively in this lecture about how, you would, put up a power satellite like that, a power habitat, and that would actually be fairly cheap to construct, then have it beamed down. You collect the sunlight outside the Earth's atmosphere, and then you beam down by microwaves to the Earth's surface, where the microwaves are converted into electrical energy, and it would bypass the desire to use fossil fuels. Jerry Pournelle used to say that it would totally get us off our dependence of fossil fuels. I'm curious if that idea is still afloat, in the space community.
Very much so. And the group that I publish and edit Ad Astra magazine for is the National Space Society. We go to their website, nss.org. They've got a lot of material on space solar power, and we work extensively with John Mankins, who is probably the leader, at least in the U.S. at this point, in thinking on that topic. So as you mentioned, this was first suggested in the U.S. within a number of technical papers back in the 70s, pursued a little bit. It kind of fell off here. The investment stopped happening. It didn't seem realistic, especially given the technology of the time. But, when we turned our back on it, Japan and later China said, this is a good idea. Now, the technology had advanced a little more by then, but not enough to make it doable. China is now looking at it very strongly. They've been doing some experiments, actually, not in orbit yet, but in transmitting, experimenting with this conversion of microwave and reconversion back down to electricity over distances. And now, of course, if we hope that SpaceX and Elon will get Starship flying in the next few months, if that works as planned, and it's behind because Elon time is always very aspirational, but if that works as planned, the economics begin to pen out much better for being able to lift enough mass to do what you're talking about, which is build a system of multiple solar power stations in orbit that are beaming down to the surface. And, where it comes down, there are people that are concerned about, well, what about the surface? Is the death ray, so forth? No. It's microwaves or some other form of electromagnetism, and you've got a rectangle on the ground which just looks like miles and miles of wires, and you could actually even farm underneath those rectangles because it would be sufficiently spread out that sunlight would come through it. So it's really a very benign technology, and as you point out, could go a long way towards getting us off fossil fuels. We'd still have the issue of power storage, which is something that really bedevils the power industry, the electrical industry. But because these things can be positioned to be in sunlight 24/7, you may not have to store it. And, assuming you could get an international consortium together and be cooperative, it really changes the balance of economics. It begins to potentially alleviate poverty and electrify parts of the world that have never even been close to having a power grid.
Let's go to first-time caller Derek in Louisiana. Welcome to the program. Hello, Derek. Go ahead.
Hey, George. Well, I've been pondering over here. I have a few points that I wanted to talk about.
Sure.
One being, and hello, Rod. Nice to speak to you also.
Hi, likewise.
Yes, sir. The first one, because of a couple of these callers, got my mind working overtime right now, how I observe around me physically, like the physical world that I live in. The second thing would be speaking about power also, and then just a question. The third would be a question. The first one is what I observe with the moon, and what I've done with, like, you can go to O'Reilly's and buy a temperature gauge, and when I stand in the moonlight and I shoot the thermometer on the ground, in the shade of my shadow is warmer. It reads a hotter temperature, and I've done it like a couple times, so you could say it's a scientific experiment. And then when you shoot it in the moonlight, it registers cooler. So would that be saying that the moon would be another light source that is transmitting cooler energy? The second topic I wanted you to talk on would be maybe, like you said, with this magnetic waves. Well, it's really about the pyramids. Would they have ancient technology to actually create energy or store energy and the ley lines of the Earth? And I guess that would tie into, or maybe I'm off basis with this, but like with Nikola Tesla, which Elon Musk got, I guess his name's company, but all of his work when he was doing those Tesla towers and the different ley lines in the Earth and gathering energy from that. And
all right, take a few of those before we run out of time before the half. Go ahead, Rod.
Yeah, so the work of Tesla is something that people still scratch their head over. You know, could it have worked had he been able to keep moving forward with it? Obviously, he beat Edison at Edison's own game when it came ultimately to alternating current and so forth. In terms of how that may have played into ancient structures and so forth, and, you know, your guess is as good as mine. I'm going to Alien Con in a couple of weeks here in Southern California, which is being put on by the same people that do the Ancient Alien Show. And I hope to learn more about it while I'm there because I'm curious. You know, you look at the pyramids, and it's quite easy to think, well, yeah, they were clever, and they stacked a bunch of rocks, and that's pretty cool, but they did it in Latin America, too. When you look at the ones in Egypt, North Africa, it truly is, and I know you've talked about this on the show a lot, the dynamics of doing that are hard to do now. So how it happened at the time puzzles the heck out of me. As far as your first question goes, I don't have an answer. I can only tell you that the surface of the moon is many hundreds of degrees Fahrenheit when it is in the sun for 2 weeks, and then when it is in the dark for 2 weeks, it's a couple hundred, I think 250 below Fahrenheit. So you're obviously not measuring that from the ground with a thermometer, if that's what you were asking.
Rod, how did Jupiter end up with so many moons?
That's still one of those things in play, which is why we want to send more spacecraft out there, because we need orbiters, you know, that can do flybys of that system again and again to really observe. As far as I understand it, and I think it is still the prevailing view, is that the ancient solar system, you know, there's a lot of crud floating around out there, and that these things accreted into solid moons. Particularly in Jupiter's case, of course, because it is the most massive thing.
92 moons, up to 92 moons.
Is that the number now?
Yeah.
Can you imagine the werewolf problem they have there?
My God.
Sorry. So, yeah, I mean, beyond that, it's just you get into discussions of, you know, where was Jupiter in the ancient solar system, and did it move in? Did it move out? How did it affect the other planets? It really is the bully of the solar system. I mean, it pushes everything around and determines what was happening around it. And interestingly, other solar systems don't all kind of work out the same way. You know, some of them have Jupiter-type planets. A lot of them don't. So it's an interesting question, and we got to get out there and learn more about it.
We're coming back with final calls in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. We'll be back in a moment with Rod Pyle and take final calls as we talk about all things space here on Coast to Coast. On our next Coast to Coast program, which will be in just about two moments or so, we're going to have Who's Behind the Secret Door for you. 4 special guests. I don't know who they are. We'll be taking your calls during each half hour with them, so adjust when you're on hold. And we're going to have some fun. So that's coming up in just a moment on Coast to Coast. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with Rod Pyle with us. Rod, what do you think of privatization of space? Do you think it's been healthy?
Absolutely. As I mentioned in the last hour, even by NASA's own estimates, which are necessarily generally conservative, what SpaceX has done in particular has saved them anywhere from 50 to 90%, depending on which activity you look at. So this way of doing business is definitely the future, and it's what keeps us globally in the lead. Now, China's trying to mimic this to some extent, but you still got that kind of uncomfortable balance of private and government, militarily run companies. So I think it's going to take them quite a while to catch up, but they'll get there eventually.
How did these private companies zoom so quickly? Did they hire like ex-NASA technical employees who knew what they were doing?
Well, as you think back, they are literally standing on the shoulders of giants. So a lot of the heavy lifting was done by the Soviet Union and the United States in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. There's a lot of knowledge to pull from there. That said, SpaceX in particular, from basically 2010 on, went from zero to commanding half the world's launch market in less than a decade. So a lot of it's just having rich guys that are willing to put money into this and with the idea of eventually making a profit. Now, Elon in particular has gotten a lot of money from NASA contracts and so forth, and that obviously helps. But as is often said, the best way to make a small fortune in space commercialism is to start with a large fortune.
That's right.
It's going to be a while before they turn a profit.
I used to say that about the restaurant business, Rod. You want to make $1 million in the restaurant business? Sure. Start with $3 million.
Right.
Yeah. Bill in Los Angeles. Take it away, Bill. Welcome to the program.
Hi, George and Rod. I'm a former newspaper writer and a longtime fan of the U.S. space program. And I got to tell you, Rod, I really appreciate your technical knowledge and your objective open-mindedness about, explaining where certain craft may or may not have come from. And I admit I'm a little bit dubious about the spoofing theory concerning the Nimitz carrier group and the aircraft in 2004, because I don't see how that would produce images on their FLIR video. But I suppose that's possible. But more interestingly, that theory doesn't work if you go back further in time, for example, to 1952, to the Washington, D.C. flyovers on 2 consecutive weekends, where both military and civilian radar operators and pilots documented speeds of 7,200 miles an hour of craft that they were pursuing. Yeah. So what's your take on that?
So it's a fascinating conversation and one that I continue to scratch my head over, and I'm old enough to remember as a very young man when Project Blue Book came out and they said, that swamp gas and weather balloons, nothing to see here, move along. And even then, as a young man, I thought, that can't be right. That's just too compelling. I read Life magazine's UFO issue, right? So there are a lot of compelling stories and lots of compelling evidence out there. And it's been looked at and picked over, as you know, by both experts in the military and at NASA and elsewhere, and, of course, civilians for decades now. You look for an answer and all that, and the only thing I guess I can say is, I was mentioning earlier this new NASA study, they don't have enough money and enough time to really completely put it to rest, but the idea is not to say yes or no UFOs or UAPs. The idea is to say, okay, let's develop a really intelligent way to study this that won't stigmatize pilots, that won't stigmatize people who come forward with the evidence that we think is compelling, and then figure out what's going on. Now, that's primarily designed for moving ahead, but there's no reason that those same rules and sets of protocols couldn't be applied to older evidence as well, as long as we've got good records of it. So I'd love to see that happen.
On the wild card line, John in Iowa. Welcome to the show, John. Go ahead.
Hey, man, I enjoy your bumper music.
Thank you.
Also, I got to tell you, I just love talk radio like this where you have an expert on and then people from the cheap seats get to call in. I mean, it's like the airwaves are still free in America. I just love it.
They are on this show. Yes, absolutely.
And so don't change, okay? So I have a planetary science question, but I was thinking on hold, I got to tell you guys, in the early 70s, I used to live, my family, a mile from NASA Mission Control, and my bus, James Irwin from Apollo 15 was in training at the time, and he would drive our vacation Bible school bus.
Oh, that's
and,
cool.
Sunday school, and his daughter was in my class, Jill Irwin, and one time she brought space food, so we got to taste some. I don't know if they had extra cases or something, but and then we had other really interesting parents of kids in my class were doing orbital mechanics work, I found out later. But my planetary science question, I should know this by now, but why is it that there's lava in the Earth that comes up through volcanoes? It's really hot down there. We're told that it's molten, and I'm just wondering, can you explain what's generating that heat? Is it radioactive? Is it friction from gravitational attraction between the Earth and the sun? I should know this by now, but I know the moon's, you said the moon's not hot in the core, probably, but what is causing all that heat down there? So thank you.
Yeah, my understanding is it's a combination of everything you said, but I think primarily radioactivity, and motion. But again, it's not an area of specialization of mine. I do know that I write a book for JPL every year about their 30 greatest hits of what they're doing technologically, and the warm moons out there, the icy moons, but that have warm oceans under them. One of the things that makes the water below the icy surface stay warm is this squeezing and flexing as they're flying around Jupiter and in some cases Saturn. So that certainly is gravitational, but the Earth, I don't know that there's enough of that going on for that to be a primary motivator.
Time for final calls with Rod Pyle. Jeff in North Carolina. Jeffrey, take it away. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, George. Hi, Rod.
Hey, Jeff.
This is Jeff from North Carolina. I'm a member of the National Space Society. It's a good organization. I highly recommend your listeners join NSS and get Ad Astra magazine. And I try to go to your annual conference whenever I can.
Good man.
My question to you, Rod, is twofold. One, is there a large enough commercial market on orbit to support 4 commercial space stations after the ISS, as a follow-on to the ISS? And 2, what do you think the killer app or the primary product is to be made on orbit that can produce enough revenue to support a commercial space station?
Boy.
So 2 questions, killer app and large enough market.
And how many? Yeah. So, you could ask the same question about launch providers, right? There's probably 115 of them at this point, at least trying to get a rocket built. How many do we really need? Well, as we're seeing, 3 or 4 in the private sector are probably going to be enough if they can be competitive. We're still waiting on Blue Origin to get there. This is in terms of rockets. In terms of space stations, it might be a little different. A couple of the companies are going to be hooking up with the ISS before it's deorbited, and then eventually unhook. Will 2 or 3 of those companies possibly decide to mate up once they've left ISS and form a sort of mid-sized space station? It's a good question. Also, it depends on whether you're talking about just on-orbit manufacturing or are you including tourism and other activities, and that's a bigger discussion than we probably have time for. But I think there's room for at least 3 or 4. And, of course, the Chinese will have a couple up. The Russians may have one by then again. And India, I would not be surprised at all if they had a small to mid-sized space station by the time we deorbit the ISS. So there's going to be a lot going on up there. In terms of the killer app, certain organ growth protocols I've seen work better in zero-G. Of course, Z-Bland, the fiber optic that's almost perfect, can only be done in zero-G. And, it's not a profit center, but we still don't know if human beings can exist over the long term in zero-G or low gravity like that of Mars, 38% of Earth, or reproduce. And that's a question we got to figure out before we move much further into this realm.
West of the Rockies, Austin's with us now in Whittier, California. Welcome to the program, Austin. Go ahead.
How you doing, George? Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, sir.
Hi. So, pretty much my question kind of pertained to the previous caller. So I was wondering if he had heard of this company. I believe that they, I'm not sure what they're called, but they're building something that was called a Voyager space station, which was their space hotel that they were building.
That's Bigelow's Bigelow's company, isn't it, Rod?
Yeah, exactly. With the inflatable space
Bigelow's
capsule.
gone. This is actually called Orbital Assembly.
Yeah, and exactly. And, just their whole idea of doing the assembly line in space. And I was just wondering if you think that company really, had a future going? Do you think they got something going, or do you think that's just kind of more like a pipe dream going on right now?
So I worked with them briefly in their previous iteration back in 2016. They were struggling then, but very well-intentioned people. It's new management now. They have collected some money and are moving ahead slowly. It's a tall order. They were originally looking at building a multi-megaton, the Von Braun station, or the Voyager station, I think it was later relabeled, which is the one you've seen written about in popular press, Space Hotel by 2025 and all that. Obviously, they're not going to make that deadline. They have since scaled their plans down a bit to a smaller microgravity environment. So, what they're talking about doing, which is a station just large enough to create a certain percentage of Earth gravity by rotating for research purposes, is I was just talking about that. It's very much a needed thing. We need to figure out how to generate artificial gravity before we can move on to places like Mars and beyond if we're going to keep people alive and healthy, and especially if they're going to reproduce. Will this company do it? I don't know. It's a tall mountain to climb, and they're going to need billions of dollars, in my estimation, to make it happen, so time will tell. But something to keep an eye on for sure.
Absolutely. John in Cleveland, Ohio. Hello, John. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, hey there. Thanks for taking my call and stuff.
Absolutely.
Hey, just a quick comment and stuff. Just wanted to say you ruined Coast to Coast AM, and long live Art Bell.
Well, that's very good. Art's a good guy, and we miss him a lot. Joe, Rochester. Go ahead, Joe. Welcome to the show.
George, thanks for taking the call. Thanks, Rob. I just got a quick question. I just wanted to piggyback, not on the previous caller, because I think that was complete lie. George, we love you. We wish you many, many years to come. But the previous caller on disclosure, Rod, this is how I look at it. I use the analogy sending your kid to camp in the summer. You send your kid off to camp, and every summer, at the end of summer, he tells you, what they did and, what he accomplished. But after 5-6 years, you find out it was a complete lie. He wasn't going to camp. He was, let's say he was waiting tables. And I think a lot of us are frustrated, but not only NASA, but with the science community in general, that what we're being told, we're paying for programs, we're paying for government agencies out of our pocket, but we're not being told the truth. And do you think eventually not only will ET, extraterrestrial life, and crafts that are obvious, that are being sighted in the sky, will that ever come out? Will the truth ever be told? Do you think in the near future will be disclosed? There'll be transparency with all these government agencies.
So I've mentioned this study that NASA's undertaking, and there are going to be people that are skeptical about it. But I have to say, I do believe that this is a sincere effort. It was a big step for them to take. I mean, it was a big step for the Air Force Department of Defense to say, okay, we'll release this stuff. Of course, it wasn't completely voluntary. It had already been leaked, the footage that George was talking about earlier, Tic-Tac videos and so forth. For NASA to accept the assignment of doing this new study is a big step. And I got to tell you, I've worked at the Johnson Space Center. I've worked at Jet Propulsion Laboratory quite a while. I know a lot of people at both places. I honestly believe, I have to say, that if they knew something that we didn't, it would come out, because they're just, scientists are basically honest by definition. They believe that good science can't be science unless it's pursued honestly and with transparency. And man, those guys, I remember I was interviewing the guy that was in charge of the science side for the Curiosity rover. And he said, Rod, every night we go to sleep dreaming about the moment where we find that dinosaur femur on Mars. And think about it, their budget would go up by a factor of 10 or 100 if something like that happened, and they could really use that money. So I think we're hearing it now. There may be more to come out over time, but I really do believe that we're hearing it now.
Rob, I want to thank you for being on the program. Do keep in touch with us, Rod, if anything pops, okay?
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, George. Take care.
You take care of yourself. Rod's website linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Up next, who's behind the secret door for the next couple hours? This ought to be fun. Who's behind the secret door? 4 special guests throughout the night, and I've got to guess who they might be. Let's see what my hit record will be like when we come right back. And welcome to Coast to Coast. Let's open up the door and see who's behind the secret door. Come on in. How are you?
Ich bin gut, Herr Nuri. I am so happy to speak with you once again.
Oh, this is going to be a tough one. How often have you been on the show?
Oh, many, many times.
And what generally do we talk about, you and me?
Das ist für you to wissen, to know.
Well, let me take a first guess. Lauren Weinstein?
Nicht gerade, nein.
Oh, man, you're a tough one. Do we talk about UFOs?
Sometimes, yeah.
I'm going to because we have short segments here, I'm going to throw in the towel. I don't know who you are. Who are you?
Meine Gefühle sind verletzt. You have hurt my feelings.
I'm sorry, but who are you?
This is Paul Smith.
Paul Smith, the remote viewer?
Yes.
Very good, Paul. Good job. I mean, right out of the button here, I'm off by 1. Jeez.
I wouldn't want to disappoint you, you know.
Well, that's great. It's good to have you with us.
Even worse, I wouldn't want to disappoint Tommy.
Well, we don't want to disappoint Tom, that's for sure. How have you been?
Good. Yeah, been very busy, as is usually the case. But,
good job. Yeah. I just had Ed Dames on yesterday, I think, and the day before. He's you remote viewers. You all do your thing. It's a
well, Ed and I go a long way back.
You do, yeah. Absolutely. And what is new with you, Paul?
Well, I'll tell you what gave me the idea for my fake voice. I'm going to be teaching another remote viewing class in Germany in a few months.
Oh, good for you. Well, you've got the accent down perfectly.
Yeah. There are people who do it better, but usually they're real Germans.
That's not bad at all. Let's talk a little bit about remote viewing, and we only have you for about 17 minutes or so. We're going to take calls with people, too, as we do. It's an incredible power, but how far into the future can remote viewers actually go?
Well, yeah, in principle, we don't know that there's a limit. The problem, of course, is after a certain point, we won't ever know whether we succeeded or not. And, of course, people don't understand this, but remote viewing doesn't always work. I mean, the fact that it does work at all is a big miracle, and the fact that it works as often as it does is an even bigger miracle. But trying to remote view the future can be a challenge, but it can be done. It's great when you can remote view the future and the future arrives and you realize you were right, or you take steps to help fix the future and you realize that you did something beneficial. I don't know, it's been years since I told this story, but, I had one really good success remote viewing a future event. I don't know if you remember the story about the USS Stark.
Yes, great story.
Yeah. And that was, of course, unexpected. My task was to remote view any major event that was going to happen in the next few days that was important to the United States. And this was a Friday, and they had me sitting. In fact, this was Ed Dames. Ed Dames was at the other end of the table on this one, and he gave me the numbers that we used to set it out, and I started perceiving this attack on a warship. A jet fired missiles. The warship was hit and exploded and caught on fire, and all kinds of nasty things were going on. And it wasn't quite what Ed had expected, so we got towards the end of the session. He said, well, we're going to quit there because I think you must be off. He thought I was going to report on something else. I said, okay, so go home for the weekend. I put the session transcript in the file in my safe drawer, went home, and Monday morning I'm getting my kids off. At the time I was a single parent, so that was always a challenge. And get my kids off to school, and I get a call from Skip Atwater, who is our operations and training officer. Skip said, where's that session you did on Friday? And I said, well, it's in my safe drawer. Why do you care? I mean, I was off. And he said, you haven't looked at the papers this morning, have you? And I said, no. And I got out my copy of the Washington Post and opened it up, and there it was. The USS Stark, an American warship, had been unexpectedly attacked by an Iraqi jet. We were supposedly helping the Iraqis, but apparently this guy didn't know it. And he'd fired a couple of missiles at the ship, and 37 Americans died. And,
that's right.
And when I was able to compare that session to the after-action report about a year later that the Navy published, it was exactly right on. It's the best session I ever did, the most successful session I ever did in terms of being accurate. It's just amazing.
Paul, how did they remote view
50 hours before the event ever happened?
Which is incredible. How did they remote view, including you, the future on an event that hasn't even occurred yet?
Well, I'd say that's the $64,000 question, but we have so much inflation here; it's probably much more valuable than that. We don't actually know exactly how it works, and it doesn't always work. I think that's partly because the future hasn't been fixed. Now, some people think it has, but I think what happens is we perceive perhaps a future event that we're going to become familiar with at the date that it occurs, at the time it occurs. We somehow can perceive that into the future, and we can receive that information here in the present. That's kind of hand-wavy, because how does that work? I don't know, but that seems to be how the process feels when you're doing it.
Well, with Paul Schmitt, the remote viewer, he is our first Who is Behind the Secret Door guest, and I did not guess him. We're going to take your calls as well. We've only got him for about 12 more minutes, and then we bring in another guest. Let's go to Joe in the Bronx. Welcome to the show. Hey, Joseph.
Hi, George. How are you?
He got me, Joe. He got me.
He got you. Well, sometimes that happens. Wanted to ask your guest, Paul, has anyone ever tried, or have you ever tried, with multiple subjects to remote view off-planet? Any subject off-planet?
Yes, multiple times, in fact. I've had, I don't know if you know who Ingo Swann was.
One of the best.
Yes, he was the person that actually invented remote viewing in the first place. Long about, I'd say the late 90s, he actually asked me to participate with him in a remote viewing of the moon, the far side of the moon, because some irregularities that had been detected through normal instrumentation, he had been asked to remote view the far side of the moon, and so that was one of many that I participated in. Got some very strange stuff from it. It'll be interesting when we get back to the moon to see if we find any evidence of the strange things that we discovered there.
That would be, because Ingo wrote a lot in his book Penetration about the far side of the moon.
Yes.
And who knows what's happening there. Connie in Daytona Beach, Florida. Connie, you're on with Paul Schmitt. Go ahead.
Hi, Paul, and hi, George.
Hi, Connie.
Connie.
I would like to see if you could maybe tell me something about my future or my past life, and anything that's important that may be coming up, my next important thing.
Do you remote view individuals at all, Paul?
I don't usually. And the fact is, remote viewing isn't something you just do off the cuff. You have to kind of be in the right frame of mind for it,
right.
And then you go through the process, and it usually takes about an hour and a half to get a start on it, to get some useful information. So,
and if I recall, coming from you guys, it's always the first thoughts that come into your mind, so you don't think about it. You just do it, right?
Yeah, it often is, actually. But of course, in the training method that we use, the controlled remote viewing, you actually can develop information about the target throughout the entire length of the session. Oftentimes, particularly when you're just doing it kind of cold turkey, what we call first-time effect, when you're doing just a one-off experiment, the very first impressions you get sometimes, or fairly often actually, turn out to be correct, although they may not necessarily be too extensive. Like you may get an impression of like an onion shape, when you're remote viewing the Kremlin or something like that, and sketch an onion shape. That turns out to be right. That might be the first impression you get.
Do you sometimes remote view for kicks for yourself?
Not usually. But and I'll tell you why. There's two reasons. First of all, he did it so much in the past that now I only do it when I really need to.
It's an effort, isn't it?
It does. It takes time, and it takes energy, and it takes focus. And I have so many balls in there at any given time, which mainly circles around remote viewing, but in terms of training people how to do it, if I can do it myself, and then when I retire or die, which will eventually happen, then it ends with me. But my goal is to teach as many people how to do it competently, so that the skill survives, me and other people who are doing it now. So I think that's important. But the fact is, there's another problem with that. In fact, remote viewers have to be blind to their target.
That's right.
Know what the target is, and so it's not something I can just say, I think I'm going to remote view X, Y, or Z, because I'm not blind then. And what happens is, of course, everything that I already know about X, Y, and Z gets in the way of what I don't know about it coming in. So.
Are remote viewers, Paul, psychically inclined?
Just as much as anybody else in the general population. One of the things they discovered in the remote viewing research at Stanford Research Institute, later SRI, was that everybody, to some degree, is psychic, which kind of freaks out some psychics because they want to think that you have to have some special gift that they have, and other people don't have it. But the fact is, everybody's got that gift. They just have to learn how to cultivate it.
Let's go to Joe in Long Island, New York, east of the Rockies. Hey, Joseph, go ahead.
Well, I'd ask you about would you remote view like a place like Antarctica or the jungles in Kenya, South Africa, or the Bermuda Triangle, and can you put yourself in the location when you remote view, or are you just basically doing it from a distance and just seeing it from a distance?
Well, it's remote viewing is kind of like, I like to say the impressions are like a half-remembered dream. So as you're getting into it, you have these often vague, every once in a while they're very vivid, like the story I told about the ship attack. That was very vivid to me, and so sometimes they are, but oftentimes they're kind of vague, but it's a dream, if you want to use dream with quotes around it. It's a dream that you didn't have before. This is some experience, some perception that you never had before, and yet there it is in your head. And sometimes it gets very detailed, but often you have to kind of slowly work through it and get the information, get the experiential data, the whole package that comes in a remote viewing session. I think I forgot part of the question now.
Who makes a better remote viewer? A man, a woman? Does it matter?
It doesn't seem to be gender dependent. It seems to be personality and commitment dependent, right? So some folks really struggle with it because they don't spend enough time really learning it. They have preconceived notions about it, about how it's supposed to work, and they just can't let go. They're not as teachable as some other people. Even those guys, though, can tend to have some success. The people who succeed the most are the ones who are open-minded, willing to do what it takes to develop the skill, practice it, and are just trainable. They're more open to being taught something new.
His other question: when you remote view, are you kind of like looking from above, or are you literally in on it?
Yes, it varies. Sometimes you get this overall view of the thing, like you're a bird's eye view. Sometimes you're on the on the surface or ground, as if you're looking towards something. Sometimes you're right in the middle of it, and you, to some degree, can control how that happens by just kind of willing yourself to take up different perspectives around the target. And that's very helpful, of course, because then you can get different perspectives, you get different kinds of information, you get different information that you might not pick up from another perspective. It's very, once you get the hang of it, once you get some good experience with it, it's a very flexible kind of way to perceive information about a target that, in theory, you shouldn't be able to get information about at all, right?
Well, that's true. Let's go to Connor in Denver. Welcome to the program. Hi, Connor. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Sure thing.
Connor, is it snowing there, too?
Yeah, it's really cold, actually. It's my car says -12 right now, but...
well, I'm out here in southern Utah, about 6,000 feet, and we're getting hammered.
Yeah, it stopped snowing down in the city, but it's still dang cold.
Yeah, wow.
So, my question, this is a fascinating subject to me, and I really do want to learn how to do remote viewing. But if you don't personally choose your targets, like you can't say you want to go and see, XYZ. Who chooses your targets, and then can you jump into the past as far as you want, or, and then in the future, I know it's a few days or so, but...
Yeah, so... Normally, when you're who choose your targets, normally you have someone who tasks you on a given target. And so, for example, if there's a target, like somebody asked earlier, if there's a target you want to do, then you usually have to get somebody else to do that target. And then they get you to do a target that they want done. And sometimes, of course, if it's an operational thing and your client wants something specific done, then they nominate the target that you work and that kind of thing. So, yeah, that's one of the issues. Now, remind me the second part of your question.
Let's take another call, okay?
Okay.
Let's go to Jody in New York. Jody, go ahead. We'll squeeze you in.
I'll talk fast. Paul, thank you. I just want to ask you if, with your remote viewing, if you can remote view possibilities. For example, what would stop the war in Ukraine? What would solve the energy crisis? What would create peace on Earth? Like, can you go into those concepts and get answers?
That's a very great challenge because there's nothing concrete there yet, right? Remote viewing is particularly good at capturing things that are concrete. Locations, persons, places, events, and so on. When you start getting into intentions, you get into perspective, speculative kind of how would you do X, Y, Z, those become very hard to do because they're not concrete. There's technically no there yet, if you understand what I mean.
Oh, that's a good point. Paul, we're wrapping things up. Give folks your website.
It's rviewer.com, the letter R and the word viewer, so rviewer.com.
And I believe one of your last books was Reading the Enemy's Mind, was it?
That was my first one. The one, and that's a good book, but the one that a lot of people really get into is The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing, because that's a really good starting point for people who want to find out more about remote viewing.
Do you think the government will ever start up programs like they had before that you were in?
That's a really good question, and I would hope they would at some point. And, of course, it's always possible. They may realize the value of it, or maybe more research will be done that makes it even more accurate and reliable. And then, who knows, the government, they'd be silly not to, wouldn't they?
Absolutely. Paul, thanks for being on the program. You were the first guest, and I missed who you were, unfortunately.
No, I'm happy with that outcome.
You did a good job. Thanks again, Paul.
Thank you, George. It's always a pleasure.
Paul Schmitt. After the break, we're going to come back with Who's Behind the Secret Door guest number 2, and let's see how I do when we come back. Up next, Secret Door guest number 2. Let's see if I can guess who it is. I missed on the first one. And welcome back to Coast, George Norrie with you. Let's open up our second door, secret door, and see who might come through. Go ahead. Well, hello there.
Hello. I'm busy drinking a cup of Linden tea.
Well, now, you sound like you investigate UFOs and unidentified flying objects. Is that true?
And I talk to you about trees that grow around cemeteries.
Marianne Winkowski?
No.
So you deal with the afterlife.
I also taught you about a plant to bring you good luck.
Man, I don't know this one. I'm 0 for 2 now. Who is this?
I once made you a fire cider concoction.
Oh, man. Who are you?
I'm Sara Chana, and at a luncheon, I made you that delicious fire cider concoction.
Made out of vinegar and pepper and all that stuff, if I remember.
All that spicy stuff to move your blood all around your body. Exactly.
Good job, by the way. What were you using for that synthesized voice?
It's a little thing you can buy on Amazon for kids. I saw it and just said, oh, my gosh, it's exactly what we need.
No fair. No fair.
It was fabulous.
How have you been?
I'm doing very well, George. How are you doing?
Everything's going great at the program, and traveling a lot, doing Beyond Belief TV shows and things like that. How's your business?
It's going very well. So I wanted to share with you that I was looking up special things on February 22nd. And your listeners will love to hear that Wilt Chamberlain, the famous basketball player, actually set an NBA record of 34 free throws. So you probably are wondering, what is Sara Chana, the herbalist, talking about Wilt Chamberlain? So this is a fun fact. My grandfather was actually Abe Saperstein that started the Harlem Globetrotters.
Oh, really?
Yes, that's even a fact Tom doesn't know. Isn't that amazing?
That is fantastic.
So I was thinking, because today is my birthday, and I want to give blessings to everybody out there, because they say when it's your birthday, it's a special day, and you have a power to give blessings. So I want to give your audience members blessings for a good year, a healthy year, and that this world of chaos should be a little bit less chaotic.
So when you say today's your birthday, you're talking about the 22nd or 23rd?
Well, the 22nd. So
that's my dad's birthday. God rest his soul.
I heard about that. So that's another special day.
He would have been 100 years old.
Unbelievable. I'm not quite 100 yet.
No, you're far from that.
A very special day. And I wanted to say that February 22nd, cold weather is coming all over the states. But for herbalists, it's a very important time. It's a little less than 20 days before spring hits. So all those trees in the freezing cold, the roots are getting ready to erupt and give us all those gorgeous flowers, those gorgeous fruits, and those gorgeous medicinal plants are right around the corner, George.
I think they've been tricked, though. This weather's been so warm, and now the cold is coming. Now it's really become winter.
Really winter, but I'm going to tell you, in the right time, all these trees are going to bloom. And so one of the things I wanted to share with your listeners is if anybody suffers from seasonal allergies, right now, 30 days before spring, is the time to take some herbal products and supplements. Because when the spring hits us, it hits us with all that pollen. So really, we're always in preventative medicine. This is the time to do it. So I have a special download on my website for all your listeners that can get some tips to stay healthy in the spring that's right around the corner, even though we're all freezing cold now.
Sarah, give out your website. Go ahead.
It's sarachana.com. That's SARACHANA.com.
Super. You've been in this for a long time now, haven't you? How many years?
Well, I don't want to age myself, but it's been over 30 years. And what I've really found is that, you know, you talk about magic, you talk about powers, you talk about powers beyond and below and in between. But these plants are here to help guide us spiritually, which we spoke about in our last program together, and physically. So it's really time to take advantage of them. We've been, well, you're right, it was a warmer winter, but a lot of us have been indoors, a little bit more of couch potatoes. Our blood is kind of stagnating around our body. So there's certain plants like ginkgo, which will increase the circulation in our body. And an herbalist teacher of mine was just saying that anybody that's slightly over 40, which could be a handful of your listeners, that if they take a couple drops of rosemary tincture or rosemary tea, that it can help possibly ward off any memory issues down the line.
How did you get started in this?
Such a long story. Well, I told you before that I was at Oxford University, sent there through Yale University. I had suffered, speaking of allergies, from seasonal allergies.
Yeah.
And I had been overseas. I was young and dumb, left my antihistamines that I was quite addicted to because as a girl I did the allergy shots, very much my generation. And my nose was dripping, my eyes were itching. Here I was at Oxford University, and I could not cope, George, and I didn't have a doctor there or prescription. This was way before you could get things online. And I went to the local health food store, and I said, help, what do I do? Like, I had no idea, George. And they handed me this cup of herbal tea, and I was like, really? This is going to help? I mean, I was a modern, hip L.A. girl. And I drank the tea, and I got to tell you, George, my nose cleared up. It wasn't miraculous. It didn't, like, go away. But it got so much better over the summer. So instead of studying Shakespeare and Chekhov, which I was sent to Oxford to do, I ended up spending my days in the library reading about botanical plant medicine.
What is it about plant medicine that works?
Well, when we use plant medicine, our brain reads the plants as food and takes what it needs and dispels what it doesn't. So a lot of your listeners out there are going to be on different pharmaceutical medicines. You have a lot of shows on the good and the bad, the pros and the cons of it. So pharmaceutical medicines definitely work in certain conditions. But sometimes the side effects of those medicines can be worse than the initial trouble that you're taking the medicine for. So plant medicine has this ability to go into our body and help stop migraines, constipation, indigestion, and that's what I've seen throughout the 30 years that I've been practicing. So what's really interesting is that real trained herbalists don't consider themselves quote-unquote healers. What we do is teach people about the medicinal benefits of plants, and we try to make that relationship between the person and the plant. For instance, one person with high blood pressure could require a different plant than someone else with high blood pressure because we have different reasons for high blood pressure. One person could just be a nervous wreck, OCD, overworking, and the next person could be overweight and not exercising. So we look at the person, George, not the problem, and then herbalists look at the different dynamics of the different plants. Some plants grow in the shade, some plants grow in the sun. Sometimes we use the root that's deep in the ground and dark and hidden and getting the nutrients. And sometimes, like St. John's wort, which we know helps with depression, is this beautiful little gorgeous yellow flower that reaches out to the sun. Even if it's in the shade, it'll reach out in the sun, and it can help with sadness and depression. It's got this bright yellow energy to it.
Bill from Wichita writes, and he wants to know, how do pharmaceutical companies create drugs based on plants?
Well, a lot of our pharmaceuticals were originally based on plants. He's absolutely correct. Like glucophage, which is used for diabetes, was originally composed from the herb called goat's rue. And goat's rue helps stabilize blood sugar levels. So a lot of our pharmaceuticals started with plants. Here's one of the problems we have with pharmaceuticals, is that plants change and morph as the environment around us changes and morphs. So the dynamics of the plant will still have the healing qualities, but it adapts to the smog and the chemicals and the plants that are growing around us because we have to adapt to everything that's changing and going around all around us, like those poor people in Ohio. I mean, that's not a great place to be in.
No.
So the plants are going to have to adapt. So the plants that will be coming out of the ground soon will have healing qualities in it because plants have to survive. There was a fascinating study done at NASA, and this was years and years ago, and you guys can look this up, that they were trying to figure out how do they clean the air inside the space capsule as it's going up to the moon, and your last guest was educating us so much, but you're going up to the moon. Let's say the person next to you expels gas, right? You can't really open up the window, right? Let's say you're sneezing or coughing. So they found in studies that plants clean the air better than anything else in those capsules. Now, they couldn't bring plants in the capsule, but they were looking at the dynamics about how plants clean the air. So the plants will create this ecosystem around them, reading the toxins, the viruses, the bacteria. They will excrete different essential oils in order to keep themselves healthy, and those oils and those plants then keep us healthy. How fascinating is that?
Absolutely. We'll take calls with Sara in the remaining moments that we've got with her. She was behind secret door number 2, which I missed again, primarily because of that synthetic voice you put on.
Your grandkids will love it. It's a great gift.
How much does that thing cost?
Oh, my gosh, I think it was $6.95. It was like the best purchase I ever made.
That's it. Now, are you talking through it?
Now?
No, not now, but when you were doing it.
Yes, I was.
What, do you just hold it up to your mouth or something?
Yes, and there's about 5 different voices, so Tom and I were kind of playing around with them before.
Oh, that's funny. Now, that was there's no way I would have guessed you on that. There's no way.
I'm sorry about that. I just had to find something a little creative.
You know what's funny, though, but yesterday I was thinking about you and that concoction you mixed at our luncheon, and people like that thing.
They do, and it's wonderful. It's called fire cider vinegar. They can look it up on my website, and it's a vinegar, and you can eat it in the winter to keep you warm. And we also know in the summer, in very hot climates, that's where we get the chili peppers. Instead of only eating foods that cool us, in hot weather, we eat foods that heat us up, and it helps us perspire and stay cool. So fire cider vinegar is phenomenal winter, summer, spring, and fall. It's a great item.
I'm hearing a lot about something called GABA, G-A-B-A. Tell me more about that.
GABA helps relax the body, and it helps you sleep. So a lot of people that are struggling with sleep, they can take some GABA. Of course, speak with your doctor. We can't give medical advice, but it is a very popular supplement for people that struggle with sleep issues.
Should you take it during the day if you're working and driving?
No, I would keep GABA personally as an herbalist to the evening hours when you're home away from moving vehicles.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Interesting. Now, did the ancients know about things like this?
Well, GABA, no, but these plants, yes. And when you look throughout the ages and you look throughout history, botanical medicine, I mean, statistics, and I don't have them in front of me, it's like 85% of the world rely on botanical plant-based medicine as their number one resource for medicine. So now that, pharmaceuticals are reaching across the world, things are changing. But plant-based medicine, is so interesting, George. I was learning from one of my herbalist teachers. And he was saying that he used to go out in the woods and out in the fields with his mother. He's from Italy, his grandmother. And he said that he sat down and made a list once of all the herbs and vegetables and plants that his grandmother ate throughout the year. And it was 120 different plants.
Wow.
When you ask a typical person, let's just talk about vegetables, they'll eat like potatoes, onions, garlic, lettuce, cucumber, maybe 8 vegetables, and maybe 4 fruits. So people used to eat with the seasons, which is very, very healthy, and they used to eat what grows around them. one of the most fascinating things is when it comes to winter, what grows in winter grows all the butternut squashes and the acorn squashes. And these vegetables have an orange tint to them. And what they do is really help us with night vision in the winter, because in the winter it starts to get cold by 4 or 5 o'clock. So eating carrots and yellow orange-based vegetables do not change our prescription, and that's where people get it wrong. But it helps us clarify and see better at night, because, George, we used to have to go to the outhouse. You know, you'd have to walk out of the house in the middle of the night. You might have a little baby, a little toddler with you. You can't trip over things. You'd have to go way out to go to the bathroom, and that's when night vision was urgent. So our maker gives us these vegetables in the winter and fall, which helps with night vision. How brilliant is that?
It is amazing how plants solve so many ills on this planet, Sarah.
Yeah, they're here to heal us. And the reason I like to do shows with you and do a lot of podcasts and TV shows is because this is available to us. And even people that are living in apartments, you can learn, we've discussed this before, to grow 4 herbs on your fire escape, on your windowsill. And out of those 4 plants, George, I could teach you how to make about 25 to 30 medicines.
That's a lot.
You know, we're going through a lot of weird things, 9/11, COVID, you know, pharmacies shut down. And I think it's really important for people to, excuse me, learn what's growing around us and how to just grow a couple plants in your kitchen counter. And everybody has the ability to do that, George. We just have to open up their eyes so that they know it's available and have the strength to learn to heal themselves. Now, obviously, someone breaks their leg, you go to the hospital, you get an X-ray.
That's what they're for, Sarah. Thank you for being Secret Door guest number 2. Up next, I'll try for number 3. I haven't gotten any of the Secret Door guests right yet, but we're going to try for number 3 when we come back on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. Let's open up door number 3 and see what happens. Come on in. How are you?
I'm fine, Mr. Nuri.
Oh, boy, this is going to be a tough one, too. So how often have you been on Coast to Coast?
Oh, many times.
Have you had enjoyable trips when you've been on?
Every single time.
And what subject matter do you normally talk about?
Oh, the paranormal.
And anything specific?
Oh, ghosts.
Oh, we have ghosts.
Ghosts and ghost hunting.
Are you Jim Harold?
No, sir.
You're not. You're not James Van Prague.
No, sir.
When was the last time we had you on the program?
Oh, a few months ago.
And were you on for a couple hours?
Not that time.
Are you with a group or anything like that?
Yes, sir, I am.
You are. It sounds like What's My Line? I need more contestants. So you're with a group, you deal with the paranormal. You were on a few months ago. I've had a lot of guests on. You've had great times on the program. Where are you based out of?
I live in Hollywood.
Hollywood? Now that's interesting. Are you a ghost hunter?
Yes, sir.
Are you Rick McCallum?
Dang it, George.
Got it. It was the Hollywood that got me.
Yeah, I should have lied and said Valley Village, but...
How you been, Rick?
I've been pretty good, just listening to the show.
Rick McCallum with us. He was our Secret Door guest number 3, which I got right. I'm 1 for 2 so far, and we're going to take calls with him this half hour, so jump on board as we do this. Rick, how did you get involved in ghost hunting?
Actually, it came to me. When I was very young, I had a pretty scary event happened with me and my mom in Kentucky when we were burying my grandfather. And after that, I was hooked. After I got a taste of it, I started going out looking for it.
You're part of the Hollywood Ghost Hunters, of course.
Yeah, Kane and I founded that. Kane Hodder, who plays Jason Voorhees in Friday the 13th movies, he and I founded it about 12, 13 years ago.
Are you still doing stunts, too?
Actually, I have a really bad knee now, so I'm just traveling around the globe, ghost hunting and writing books.
Doing your thing and being our guest, because we love you here, Rick.
Oh, I love being on here. This is akin to a comedian being on Johnny Carson.
You're right. It's that kind of feeling.
It really is.
Yep. What has been for you the most amazing ghost hunting story that's ever happened to you?
Oh, boy, there's a bunch. There was a thing that just happened recently. I was in Scotland at Balgony Castle, and there were reports of a man who had been deformed earlier, before he passed, and he would throw the women out of the chapel.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, he'd say, get out, and, scare them out. So we were shooting something, and we had a lady with us who was actually pretty strong, and I knew she wouldn't be afraid, so we actually sent her into the chapel by herself. And she was in there about 5 minutes or so, and nothing was really happening. So I went and I sat down with her, and then a couple other people came in, and we started asking questions. And we started getting immediate answers to the questions. And it turned out, I just had the feeling the whole time that he wasn't a bad man. He was just lonesome because, he'd been shunned his whole life, for not being the best-looking man on the block.
Yeah.
And we just asked him, if you had time to be with Cheryl, what would you do? And that was the girl that was there. And he said, love her. And then we asked again, if you had some more time that you could do anything you want, would you be nice to her? And he goes, I will. And I told him, I said, look, there's a lot of girls that come in here, obviously are lonely. If you just be nice to them, maybe one of them will like you back. Would you do that for me? And he goes, I will. So we're getting direct responses from this man that had been throwing everybody out. And he just seemed to have taken a real liking to Cheryl Plum. And it was actually like a love story. It was very, very different from what we usually get, because what we usually get is, more intense, more scary, things like that.
Sure.
This was just nice.
How did Cheryl handle it?
Cheryl was a champ. She sat in there and she was asking her questions, and, he just really took a liking to her.
How old do you think he was?
From what I'd heard from the guys, the Scottish paranormal guys, he was probably in his 40s, I would guess.
When all this happened to him, that's not bad.
Yeah, but it was really something, because I've been doing this for over 50 years. I'm so used to the scary stuff, the
evil stuff and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then this was just so sweet. It was a nice change.
Rick McCallum is with us. He is Secret Door member number 3. I got this one right because of one clue. One clue gave it away. Hollywood. I could have guessed Kane Hodder too, but I guessed you first.
Well, I appreciate that.
Now tell me about your knee. What happened?
Well, I've been in the stunt business for over 40 years.
Yeah.
And a long time ago when I was in college, I pretty much messed up my knee. And then when I was in Scotland, there was a famous battle, the 1303 Battle of Roslin. And I wanted to go out in the field in the middle of the night, and because there were 30,000 people died in this battle, and ghost hunted by myself. And as I walked over a hill, I hit a piece of mud, went down on my knee, and just blew it out, slid down the hill, and ended up having to walk 2.5 miles to get out of the forest. So I need a knee replacement. So it would not be fair to go out and try to do stunts and have them say, run up the stairs, and go, well, I really can't do that.
Are you going to get one of those titanium knees?
Yeah, I guess I'm going to have to eventually. But right now, I'm doing the St. Jude Challenge for a 100-mile walk for this month.
Good for you.
And I've got like about 30 miles to go. So,
Danny Thomas's old creation.
yeah, why he's not more venerated and honored than he is way beyond me.
Well, you're right about that. Because he devoted his entire life to St. Jude's.
Well, he was the one that got all his friends to pony up the money to start it.
Yep. Well, he made a deal that if he ever hit it big, he would do everything he could and create a hospital for children, and he did it. He was a man of his word.
Yeah, I kind of take from him because, any of the sales I get from the books, I donate the money to St. Jude.
Rick McCallum with us. We're going to open up the phone lines right now, so if you want to jump on board and talk about ghost hunting, come on and do your thing. Have you ever been ghost hunting in a cemetery, Rick?
Yes, I have. It's not my general place to go because
I agree.
I kind of tend to think that that's sacred ground. But I have gone there when people have asked me to go there because of circumstances. They were seeing things, and so I would just go there and try and clean up what was going on. Didn't actually find anything that time either, but I have been to many at night. Roslyn Chapel, I go out to that a lot. I don't actually go into I go down by the castle, but I walk through the graveyards to get there in the middle of the night. So, been through quite a few. I prefer to think that those people have all found peace and they're resting.
Yeah, generally cemeteries aren't very friendly places to go. They're not happy places.
No, they're not. And you know what? It's there is activity in there because I know quite a few people that have made a reputation off going, to cemeteries. I have seen some weird things at cemeteries. Out at the Pioneer Saloon out near Las Vegas, I was coming back from a ghost hunt there, and there's an old-time cemetery there. And as I was going by, I had my stepmother with me. All these lights came on out in the middle of the desert right off that area in the cemetery. So there's nobody out there, so I couldn't explain that, but it was very interesting.
Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you wish you weren't in it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I had something attached to me at the Pioneer Saloon, and I got horrendously sick right off the bat. And I just got up. I went outside. I tried to get better. It didn't work. Finally, I came back in, and I was with a group, and I just said, look, guys, I've been doing this for 50 years, and I've never left a ghost hunt, but I think I'm going to ruin this for you because I'm so sick, so I'm going to have to say goodbye. And I turn around, and I walk out. Well, the next day, I get a girl who had been filming, and she put it up on YouTube. I think you can still find it, where you can hear the voices talking about me. And when I came back in and I said I have to leave, there's a male voice that goes, "Turn Rick back.
Send him back," right?
And I turn and I say, thanks for having me. And I start to walk away, and you hear a voice on the tape say, "Release him." So that one was pretty strange.
Let's take a couple calls here for you, Rick. Connor's with us in Denver. Welcome to the program. Hi, Connor. Go ahead.
Hey, so I was wondering with attachments, can something attach to you if you were just like walking by a cemetery or some place that was haunted? Can something leap out and sort of attach itself to you like that?
If you're vulnerable, Rick, you can get attached, can't you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. A lot of people wear different stones, crystals, religious ornaments and stuff like that to try and keep from getting attached. What I usually do when I leave somewhere, I just go, hey, I go home, you stay here.
Well, they listen to you.
They do, actually, most of the time. But if something attaches to you, there's no doubt that something's wrong.
How do you get rid of an attachment if it's already on you?
It's really simple. You're the master of your own domain, and you have to, in no uncertain terms, tell it to get lost. It might take you several times, but it will eventually leave you.
Is that when you need an exorcist as well?
No, not really. Exorcist is for something far more serious than that.
Deep possession, right?
Yeah.
Let's go to Matt in Montana. Take it away. Hi, Matt. Go ahead.
Hey, guys. Rick, I was just wondering if you've ever investigated a haunted movie set.
Actually, yes, I have. I'm not allowed to say the studio.
Or the name of the movie, I guess.
Yeah, it was. It was one of the Hatchet series of movies, and I went upstairs to this. The security guard told me that this one hallway was haunted and everything else. So I asked a couple of the actors, and they said, "Oh no, we don't want to go." But the makeup girl wanted to go, and we went up there, and it was very haunted. But what was so strange was a security guard and one of the actors came up, and they said, "What are you doing?" We said, "We're ghost hunting." And he says, "What's that thing in your hand?" I said, "It's a K2 meter." Right? He goes, "What's that?" I said, "Well, if it lights up, it means that, it's a electromagnetic field, and it could be a spirit." And he says, "Well, anything else happen here?" I said, "Yeah, we heard voices." And he goes, "You're kidding." And the girl goes, "No, we just heard them." Right? And he goes, "Well, I'm not afraid of ghosts." And the light goes off, all five, and the two of them turned and ran down the stairs. So,
feet don't fail me now, right?
Yeah, feet do not fail me now. Yeah, but I had it on tape. It was so funny hearing them running down the stairs.
Have you ever had any studios, or have you heard, Rick, of studios haunted by former film stars?
Yeah, actually, Universal Studio is supposed to. I may get this wrong, which stage it is. I think it was stage 14 or 17. That they many times have seen what they think is Bela Lugosi dressed as Dracula running through the catwalk.
Oh, that would be interesting, and that would be appropriate too, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And
let's go to Susie in Ohio. Susie, take it away. Go ahead.
Hey, George.
Hi, Suze.
Loving the show tonight. I wanted to tell your guest speaker, I just got back from Scotland, and I'm wondering, did you ever visit the underground vaults in Scotland?
Yeah, actually, I've been there several times.
And did you feel what I felt?
What did you feel, Suze?
Oh, boy. If you believe in that, I could feel the entities. We actually even saw them because I was with a tour group, and we saw, if you look down that hall, if you've been down there, you know what I'm talking about. There's a long hall. We saw a beckoning hand, and we're like, no, wait a minute, we're seeing things. And three of us from the tour walked down there. There was nobody there. And then I don't know if you went to the witches' cauldron, the old witches' vault where they used to do their rituals.
No, I've never been there.
Ooh, that's in the this was the underground vaults, and it was extremely. You're talking about. You could feel they were very, very strong there. I just wondered if you had been down to the underground vaults.
Anything
I
happened,
have,
Rick?
actually, and we did, if I have time to say this, we did have a pretty interesting thing happen to us.
Yeah, go ahead.
Down
Tell
there.
us the story. We got a couple minutes.
We were filming, me and two of my other friends, and I was sitting cross-legged underneath this one part, and this girl was filming me. And I hear her talking to somebody. And I'm looking right at her. She's only like 15 feet away, and there's enough light for me to see that there's nobody else in this long hallway. And I'm all the way at one end, so there's the other end's way down at the other end. There's nobody there. And she's still talking and talking. Finally, I said, "Carol, who are you talking to?" She goes, "I'm talking to Brian." And I went,
"Who?
Brian's not there." Yeah, that was the guy that was with us. I said, "He's down all the way at the hall, all the way at the end." She goes, "He was just standing there." I said, "I've been looking at you for 15 minutes. He hasn't been here."
Oh, wow.
So as we left, he stopped into a room to try scrying. If you guys know what that is, that's looking into the mirror and trying to,
yes,
get the thing. Well, I was in there, and I wasn't getting anything, so I went out and I sat down, and Carol came out and sat down next to me, and we hear Brian talking in there. And then as he comes out, he looks over and he sees me, and he's kind of startled. He goes, "How long have you been out here?" I said, "I don't know, 5 minutes or more." And he goes, "I was just talking to you. You were standing next to me." And I said, "No, I wasn't." So the vaults underneath, they do have a presence. They really do. And I can understand why the lady felt it.
They almost like they capture the future or something like that.
Yeah, there's other stories about that. A lot of people don't know about the underground stuff. Back in the old days, there was no lights down there, so the criminals would hide in there, and when people would come in to sleep, the poor people...
They'd get robbed.
Well, that was the best thing that happened to them.
Oh, God. Unbelievable.
So there's a lot of energy down in the vaults.
Rick, what's your website?
Don't have a website right now because the two guys that ran our websites have gone out of business, so... anytime anybody wants to get hold of me, it's just Hollywood Ghost Hunters on Facebook.
Super. Rick, take care of yourself. We'll have you back on the program again.
Well, thank you, George.
Thank you. Rick McCallum, he was guest number 3. I was 0 for 2, and then I got that one right. We have one more coming up in just a moment here on Coast to Coast. Let's see if I get that right, and I'm having some fun. We do this every once in a while. Who's behind the secret door? Jump on board. Get ready to make a phone call with our final Who's Behind the Secret Door number 4. Let's find out if I can guess, but you might as well be on hold, ready to ask him or her a question. Absolutely. On our next Coast to Coast program, Dr. Bradley Nelson joins us with his latest work called The Body Code, Unlocking Your Body's Ability to Heal Yourself. I'm looking forward to that. And then later on, investigative reporter Cheryl Jones joins us as we deal with the cosmic consciousness, and Cheryl will be also taking open line calls. And then, of course, we've got a tribute to the late Michael Heiser, one of our great guests who just passed away. Again, a sad story there. And welcome back to Who's Behind the Secret Door, and let's open up door number 4. We got to oil that thing. Come on in. How are you?
Hey, George, what's going on?
I think I know this voice, but I'm not sure. How are you, sir?
I'm great. How are you tonight?
And I'm good, too. And what subjects do you normally talk about on our program?
Well, it's not looking for balloons, but it typically is UFOs.
And have we found any?
Well, we'd like to believe that we do have one in our possession.
Is this Kevin Randall by any chance?
No, I'm not that old.
Are you a scientist?
No, but I work with many scientists.
Are you Jim Harold?
No.
How long have you been on the program?
Oh, going all the way back to Mr. Bell.
Well, that goes way back. What would you specialize in terms of UFO investigations?
I would say Roswell.
Aha. I would say you're the late Stanton Friedman, but he's passed on.
Well, let's say I worked a great many years with him as well.
He was a great guy.
He was.
And if you worked a lot with him, that's got to make you Don Schmitt.
Bingo. Hey, how you doing, George?
Don, I'm great. How about yourself?
I'm doing wonderful. We had a big snowstorm today, but tomorrow we'll clean everything up and get ready for spring.
Yeah, where are you, by the way?
I'm just half hour northwest of Milwaukee, 2 hours from Chicago, where I worked with Dr. Heineck all those years.
The Midwest has gotten blasted by this storm, hasn't it?
Yes, but we've had a good winter. Nothing to complain about.
No, it'll warm up again. This should melt everything off in another couple days, huh?
That is correct, George.
That's good. What's new with Roswell, Don?
Well, we are, my partner Tom Carey and I, we are still working on the case. We have another couple research trips planned already, and we're dealing more and more with the families because I would say at this point all the first-hand witnesses have joined Stan, who we're both sure he has all the answers right now, just like Dr. Heineck.
Yeah.
And all the other dearly departed. But we're finding families that still receive deathbed testimonies. People that we had tried to find, albeit unsuccessfully, but wow, we find the families, and they tell us, sure enough, that just before Dad died, just before Mom died, what they experienced back in 1947, and it was no weather balloon.
At this point, with all the research you've done on this topic, what have you concluded?
Well, for having, and Kevin Randall would vouch for this, we both were total skeptics when we started our own investigation back in 1989. My God.
Skeptics about the entire situation?
About Roswell.
Yeah.
About Roswell. And the idea that the government would have in its possession any physical evidence and that it could keep something of that magnitude a secret for all that time. And there were no whistleblowers that we were aware of. And to make that first trip down to New Mexico, so confident we would wrap this up in a single weekend, prove that this was nothing more than a balloon device or something just as conventional, just as prosaic. And then to come away having talked to first-hand witnesses who held the wreckage. And one by one, they described something truly extraordinary. And then year after year, just witness after witness, and the lack of contradiction, George. I mean, as we both know, you have multiple witnesses to even a car accident. You have 10 different versions. But that was not
true.
The case with Roswell.
They stayed pretty consistent, didn't they?
Consistent. And the ones who would contact us, we always became very wary of the fact that, they're seeking attention. They're looking for notoriety of some sort, and we were quickly able to always disqualify them. But the vast majority, 99% of the witnesses, we had to find them, and they were reluctant. They were very concerned about breaking their security oaths, loss of their pension and benefits, and then one by one, as they would talk, and the stories were consistent, the details were totally consistent, and it all smacked of something very profound, extraordinary in their lives that they never forgot.
Who was the undertaker at Roswell?
That was Glenn Dennis.
That's right. Now, he was very compelling, too, wasn't he?
At first, and then it became more of a case of the nurse that he had first named identified to us, and then we spent a great amount of time and money trying to find her, even to verify that she existed. And then when we learned that he had provided us with the wrong name.
Why would he do that?
Well, he was having an affair with the nurse, and I confronted him about that. And back in 1947, that would have been a major scandal.
Huge.
And I'm willing to accept that that was probably the underlying reason. Today, that would be almost a badge of honor for a lot of people. But we do have multiple witnesses who do confirm the phone calls from the base hospital, inquiring about the child-sized caskets and the chemicals or the treatment, the means that could be used to preserve tissue which had to be exposed to the elements for a great amount of time. That was consistent. And so that much we do certainly accept with Glenn Dennis, the mortician.
Do you question his authenticity at this point?
For the part of the nurse that she had confided to him, that he made it to the base hospital and was escorted out, that type of thing, that part we dismiss.
You do?
Anything dealing with the nurse. But the phone calls and at the Ballard Funeral Home where he worked was involved, yes, we do still accept that.
Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell, whom I've talked about tonight on the program, he was born in Roswell.
Just down in the Pecos Valley, south of the Roswell area, and he was attending high school at the time.
And one of the few astronauts to truly believe that we are being visited.
Not only visited, but that as a young boy, and he was already hearing all the rumors throughout the Roswell area. And then later he made it a point to look into it. And then after he had graduated from MIT, he had spent some time at the Pentagon, and he was running in the officers who were still talking about Roswell. And then he started looking into the whereabouts of people he knew were there in 1947, and one by one they would confirm exactly as we've been discussing, George. And I know for as many times I was with Edgar, and especially we would do interviews together live in studio, and off mic, off camera, he'd always lean over by me and he'd go, Don, did you ever talk to so-and-so?
Exactly.
And it was amazing. We were talking to the same people, and we were hearing the exact same testimony that it did happen, that they did take into possession the actual remains of a crash of a genuine craft of unknown origin and its crew.
In our final minutes with Don Schmitt, we're talking about Roswell, New Mexico, and that incredible 1947 case. If you want to make a call, do so before we run out of time. The phone lines are open right now. Tom's ready to get your call. Of all the cases that you've investigated, Don, including Roswell, which you're an expert in at this point, would you still say that that is the case?
Yes. And it's the one case that is we're both eagerly and anxiously watching with the whistleblowers, the testimony. Just imagine if Congress would have opened this up 10, 15, 20 years ago, and all those Roswell witnesses being able to testify.
Who were still alive, right?
Who would have still been alive. And then why are you asking for documents? Why are you asking for testimony about fleeting sightings in the sky? Landings. No, you have the actual physical evidence. Let's go find it. Let's go examine it and present it to the world once and for all. But blow it open overnight.
Do you think that the craft that crashed at Roswell might have been the same one that Kenneth Arnold saw a few months before that?
Well, in Arnold's case, there were 9 of them. So it certainly could have been any one of them. And the fact that the shape was generally described the same way. Even that very afternoon, there was a Daniel Wilmot who described seeing a craft that he couldn't identify, moving up towards that general area, 75 miles northwest of Roswell in the Corona, New Mexico area. So stranger things have happened.
They really have. They really have. We'll take some calls with you, Don, in the waning minutes. But what else have you been up to?
Well, just had a Zoom meeting with Bryce Zabel and Don Most about the rewriting of the script on the next Roswell movie, hopefully, and the fact that great. In the movie, our dear friend who we were speaking of earlier, Stan Friedman, would actually be portrayed.
Oh, that would be something. Wonder who would play his part.
Well, originally, the two of us, we would joke back and forth, and I think he pretty much had accepted and agreed that Robert De Niro would be a perfect
that's interesting.
To portray Stan.
That is interesting. He was my first radio interview back in 1971.
Yes.
Unbelievable. Let's go.
And he hooked you, didn't he?
He did. He was great. He was a great speaker, and we stayed friends.
He was a great omen, and obviously it has served you well all these many years. I know he's smiling down right now at you, George.
Frank in Colorado, west of the Rockies. Frank, go ahead, sir.
Good morning, gentlemen. Yes, I was born and raised in Los Alamos, New Mexico.
Uh-huh.
I was born in 1956. Parents of all my friends and siblings and everybody, they were of the World War II generation.
Yes.
And a lot of these gentlemen worked down at Roswell. They worked at Los Alamos. They worked everywhere. And the Roswell incident is real, whether people want to say it is or not. You know, and I think UFOs have been here for a long time.
Had you ever heard anything as far as from anyone at Los Alamos?
It's mostly just, I was, like I say, I was a teenager and a young kid when it first became really aware of us. In the 60s, we were too young when we were like 1 or 2, but once we grew up and got in school, we knew all about it. I mean, it was big news down there all the time till I was out of high school.
Well, you are correct about that the rumors, the buzz,
right?
It never stopped down in Roswell. As much as the government pretty much shut down the press, shut down the witnesses, shut down the base. I mean, they were locked down during that recovery period. But the buzz under the table was still going on. And many a witness has told us that they could always tell when their parents were talking about the 1947 incident, when they would close the drapes and they'd go into the kitchen and start whispering between themselves.
Remember the late Jesse Marcel Jr.?
Absolutely, yes.
Great
Another
guy.
Dear friend.
Yep.
Yes. Yep.
Who was told by his father about that, about the crashed wreckage.
Had handled the wreckage himself as his father returned back to the base from the debris field, and was so excited that he would wake Jess Jr. and his wife, Viad, to come out to the kitchen where he had debris scattered on the floor. So you don't forget such things. And Jess Jr., a retired colonel and a medical surgeon, certainly had familiarity as far as with all types of materials, and to his very deathbed, he swore that it did happen.
Don, any new works coming out from you?
Working on a couple new books. One is dealing with the best pilot sightings from all around the world. I know we're very familiar with,
great.
You had mentioned even Kenneth Arnold, but we're going to get into the fact that our pilots have been experiencing genuine hardware manufactured from somewhere else, and it wasn't Chinese or Russian back since 1947. The skies were pretty pristine, pretty virgin back then, and I'm looking forward to putting this all together.
Well, you have a home here with everything you do, because we think the world of you, Don.
Well, the same here, George, and we appreciate that, as I said, that you're continuing on the legacy, and you have many wonderful, as far as fill-in hosts, and I know that, and you'll always be the first, George.
Well, we love George Knapp. He's the best when it comes to UFOs. Thank you very much. Don Schmitt and his incredible work on Roswell. Well, that's The Secret Door tonight. I got 2 right. I got 2 wrong, but they're all great guests. For Dan Galante, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladouceur, Stephanie Smith, Chris Boros, Tim Banal, George Knapp, and Ian Punnett, I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe,